My father died in 2009 after a heart attack, ironically whilst helping build a temple in a church. I had recently turned 18 when it happened, and was thrust into the unpleasant process of funeral arrangements. With help from my family, we were able to set up a funeral at that very same church because life is ironic like that. At the funeral, I was with my family, greeting people at the door and showing them in. I was sullen, broken, and angry with the world at large as I shook each person's hand. I offered them some token thanks for coming. I knew all the faces that came by, if some only distantly, until this woman came through the line with a large wrapped package in her arms. Funerals, at least as I know them, aren't usually the time for gifts, so she immediately caught my attention. She was about 5'6", with long black curly hair, and seemed to be in her late 50s, which would fit her knowing my father. She came up and shook my hand, rather enthusiastically considering the setting, and said, "Hi, I'm Monica. I knew your dad very well, and he would want you to have this." As she pushed the package into my arms, I immediately felt, as I knew it was a book, a big one. Not as big and thick, but long and wide in the cover, about 2 feet by 1, respectively. This being not the time for it, I set it aside and continued the funeral, but not before she gave me a big, out-of-nowhere hug. I assumed that Monica attended the funeral and left afterwards, but I never saw her leave. In fact, me nor any of my family had ever even heard of her. I asked the people who helped me put it all together if they knew her, but they had no idea who she was. No call logs, no social media messages, nothing. In fact, we kept my father's death specifically off of social media because even at the time, I saw Facebook for being the incredibly terrible place that it has proven to be. Nobody had heard of her, to the point I thought she might be crashing random people's funerals. But she knew my father. I know this because inside the book she gave me is a handwritten inscription that is a bit too personal for me to share, but it was definitely referring to my father by name. Lastly, that inscription was written as though it was a gift being given to my father, and was dated at the end with the date of his birthday in 1984, 25 years before the funeral. The funeral got done and sucked, as funerals do, and we started the process of going through all my dad's stuff. I eventually looked at the big book we got, and it was called The Secret Teachings of All Ages, an encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy by Manly P. Hall. As I started to look through it, what first caught my attention was how expensive the book looked and felt. Thick parchment, well-made spine and cover, and meticulously written from what I could understand at that time. I only made it through 2 pages before my head just felt numb. The book is big, but the font inside is pretty small comparatively. Then there were the illustrations, massive, full-page pictures depicting some of the weirdest symbology I've ever seen. Pictures of gods, rituals, expansive tables of elements in different worlds. There's a picture just about every 3rd page, each more strange than the last. All pictures looked old. I'm not an art guy, but this looks like the way old paintings were done. All the illustrations were printed into the book, not drawn there originally. I've read a small bit more now that I'm older and can understand the writing a lot better. It seems to be written in a way that it describes the philosophy and rituals of each of the named groups, as well as the history of those rituals and the connecting line throughout. It does not take a stance on the validity of the information. Additionally, the edition I have is the Golden Anniversary Edition, and I have found that the original edition was published in 1925. I really don't know what the hell I'm supposed to do with the book. It could be worth something to sell, but for some reason I find that idea gross. I've been toying with making a YouTube series where I break it down a few pages at a time, but I think I'll only get views by moronic QAnon people, and I don't want to feed that nonsense. A few years ago, I was living in a highly dense area, predominantly made up of townhouses. It wasn't a great area of my city, but it wasn't the worst. My neighbors consisted of working-class individuals, families, and retirees. Someone was always home at any time of the day, so it felt safer than it really was. I'd just gotten home that morning after working my usual graveyard shift. My general routine was to eat, watch TV, and go to bed. It wasn't uncommon for me to doze off on the couch, and this day wasn't an exception. Something woke me up, a door closing, I assume. I thought it was my neighbor getting home until I heard something moving in my house. I'm still kinda half asleep. I jump up and fly towards the door. At double time, what do I see? A kid, no more than 8 years old. I asked him if he was okay. I asked him if he was lost, and sorta herded him out the door. In hindsight, I was just following him out. After closing the door, I called my mom, just trying to process what had happened as I woke up. I then called the police, non-emergency, to report the incident. The consensus was the kid was just trying all doors. If he found one open, he was going to grab easy things, wallets, cash, keys, and case the place for later. Understandably shaken up, I book off work for a few days. I start assembling IR security floodlights, security cameras, a half-dozen reed switches, a cellular alarm system, and a few webcams I specifically modified. Jesus Christ, it's just a kid, not Charles Manson. I rig all my perimeter alarms, set up motion detection zones, set up some automation, so if anything happens at night, the entire main floor lights up, and fine-tune things so I don't get false alarms. I went absolutely nuts, but I felt so violated I needed control. A couple of weeks later, vacation rolls around, and I'm out of the city for a week. Throughout the week, I periodically check on my system to see what kind of recordings there are. Figuring someone is going to break in, midweek the alarm goes off. I log in and see nothing immediately concerning, even though it was a motion-detected alarm for my front door. After reviewing the video, I noticed my screen door opened and closed, which I figured triggered the alarm. Nothing happened, even though I periodically checked the feed. At the end of the week, the same thing happens. This time when I log into my live feed, I can clearly see the screen door is open, but that's it. I can't see a shadow or a silhouette. Perhaps I foolishly think the wind caught it and blew it open. The camera continues detecting motion and keeps on sending me alerts for the better part of 15 minutes. Nothing more happens that night, but I decide to cut my trip short and go home the next morning. Upon arrival, I discover tool marks on the deadbolt, the door frame, and the handset. Someone had definitely tried to break in broad daylight, no less. Needless to say, I moved as soon as possible after that. This didn't happen to me, but a friend of mine. She told me that her friend had met a guy on Tinder from another city whom she had been texting for a little while. They had planned to meet up at her apartment one night. The whole time he was there, she got a really weird and creepy vibe from him. He would make morbid jokes and tease and flirt with her in a super creepy way, like telling her he loved her titties, but they would be much bigger and therefore hotter if she was 200 pounds heavier. When it was time to go, he seemed reluctant to leave and asked if he could stay, but she refused and he finally left. Half an hour later, however, he was back at the front door asking if he could spend the night at her place because he had missed his train, and she had reluctantly agreed to let him sleep on the couch for the night. But when she went to bed, she made sure to lock her bedroom door. At some point in the night, she heard strange sounds and him creeping through her apartment. A few moments later, he was knocking on her door, saying he needed help with something. But her gut feeling told her not to open the door, so she stayed put. When morning came, she cautiously left her room and looked through her apartment. He was gone, apparently, but she discovered her bathroom was entirely covered in foil. Always make sure to trust your gut and meet your Tinder dates in a public place. If it's the first time, guys, you can't really gauge a person from just texting them. I just came out of a relationship and felt like a bit of casual dating will be fun. So I went on to Tinder. I made it clear to a few people I actually matched with and spoke to that I did not want anything serious, just a dinner date or a pub night here and there. I matched with a really cute guy. Let's call him Pete. He had just moved to my city and also wasn't looking for anything serious. He just wanted to meet some people and see some local spots. The first night that we met up at a well-known Topaz bar, I chose this place because I had a few friends there that were waitresses and the bar staff, so I felt safe meeting a stranger here. He was on time. We had nice chats, really cool guy on first impression. We spoke about work, to which he responded that he's a software developer, but he's just starting his freelancing career. We spoke about where he stays now, that he's moved up here, and he said that he's sharing a place with some friends. Rent is quite pricey in this city, so it made sense to me. He asked where I live, and I told him that I'm lucky to even have my own bedroom apartment in quite a nice and popular part of town, mostly thanks to my parents that helped me save and gave me a portion of the deposit money for my 21st birthday, which I invested and grew into. I had enough to put down on a decent deposit. He then offered to drop me off at home, but I said no, I'd prefer to Uber home by myself. He asked if this was because I was going to meet someone else after him, and I laughed, because I generally thought this was a joke. The next time I saw Pete was about 3 days later. He said that he knew it was fast, but he actually couldn't stop thinking about me and he wanted to see me again. This time we met at a different restaurant, also one I chose because I went to school with the owner and knew all of the staff pretty well. The place is a little bit more pricey, and he got super annoyed with me for ordering as much as I did. I couldn't understand why, since I insisted on paying for my own stuff both times we met. That night, same story. Let me drop you off at home, please. Again, I said no. While we were in the middle of this conversation, he gets a call. He stepped away, but I could hear a fair amount. No, I'm not going to stay with you again. Yeah, I'm with her. Don't worry about it. Okay? I'll be home soon. So now I think he's chatting to his roommate or maybe his mom, but I don't ask. He comes back to our table. Please, I insist. Bad things happen to women that Uber home this late by themselves. I'd feel better if I dropped you off. Not having the energy to argue, I tell him fine, and I put my address into his GPS. As soon as he got home, he messages me and tells me he'll be picking me up in the morning to go for a picnic. I reply that I actually have cleaning to do, but again he insists that he'll see me at 10. Come 10 a.m. the next morning, best believe he's right outside my apartment. I get into his car, and he leans over to kiss my cheek. I notice that his breath stinks. Obviously, I'm a little grossed out. We have our picnic, and it's quite nice. He tried to kiss me a few more times, but I avoided it with everything in me. By about 4 p.m., I tell him that I really want to go home. The park that we went to is about an hour-and-a-half drive from my apartment, so I couldn't really Uber back home because it would cost a fortune. He agrees it's time to go, so we get in his car, and we are off. I fall asleep in the car on the drive back, and when I woke up, he asked if we should finish the rest of the bubbly we got up in my apartment. I said to him that I don't want to, and he just snaps. Something along the lines of, "What are you hiding from me? Just be honest. Why are you so desperate to keep me out of your fucking apartment?" I was so confused. I actually just kept quiet. He dropped me off, but I could see his car across from my apartment for about half an hour before he actually left. About 5 minutes after he left, he let me know that he's home safe, and he thinks he's starting to fall for me. So naturally, I'm freaked the fuck out, because I made it clear that I didn't want anything serious, and he said he felt the same. I said to him, if that's the case, I think we should take a break from hanging out with each other. About 5 days later, he messages and asks if we can go to dinner again. He found an Italian cuisine place he knows I'll love. I tell him it's cool. He should just send me the address. He tells me that he'll pick me up. So 7 p.m. comes, he tells me he's downstairs. And as I go down to meet him, I see he's standing at my gate. I press the remote control to open the gate, and he walked inside to meet me. Show me which one is yours. I'd love to see how you live. Not hi, not how are you. That's his opening line. So now I'm naturally unsettled. I say to him that I'm starving. Could we go get dinner? And I'll show you my place at a later stage. At dinner, he gets a call again. This time, he didn't step away. I don't know. I can let you know by 10. He turns to me. Am I sleeping by you tonight? No, I don't know. I have to work tomorrow. Yeah, me too. Then back to the caller. I'll let you know, okay? I hear the caller respond. No, you are not. Can you just get your things, please? And do what with them? Take them to that girl you're seeing. I'm done asking you. Now, I am sitting here in absolute shock and terror. What in the fuck is going on here? Our food arrives, and we barely speak. I say to him, why did you ask me if you can sleep over by me? We are not spending time together like that, you know this. He then spins the story about how he just wants to hang out and again, see how I live. So I then say to him, very frankly, that I don't like having strangers in my apartment. He gets very touched, and the bill arrives. As per usual, I pay for myself. He pays for himself. I say to him, I'll get an Uber home, and he says,
What's the use? I already know where you fucking live. Let me drop you off.
By now, I have already decided that this will be the last time I see him. I get into his car and reach for my jumper that I threw in the back when he fetched me. I notice a bag in the back of the car full of clothes and toiletries, as well as a pillow. I don't really think much of it. I don't personally drive or own my own car, but I know my sister always has the most random shit on the back seat of her own car. On the way home, he's dead quiet, when suddenly he says, "Do you know how much of a selfish bitch you are? I've had no issue driving you around, but you don't want me to sleep over by you?" I say to him that I've never had an issue with Ubering, and if he's so touched, I also have no issue with paying him what the Ubers would have cost me. I'm over this, and I'm not even playing nice anymore. His phone rings again. The caller says, "Your stuff is in the security room by the gate, Pete. Stay with your girlfriend or stay with your mom. You are fucked for taking advantage of everyone like this." Pete responds, "I don't speak to my mom, and you know this, you fucking bitch," and then hangs up. Now I think this may be an ex-girlfriend that he needs to collect things from. Before I have even had a chance to process what had happened, he turns to me and starts yelling at me. "I have nowhere to go. Are you fucking happy, you spoiled brat? Living off of mommy and daddy's money? Getting driven around by me like I fucking work for you, bitch?" My whole body got stiff with fear. I don't know if I'm going to cry or throw up. In my head, I'm just planning how I'm going to grab my bag the second he stops and run straight to the cafe under my apartment. If you run through the cafe, you can get to the gate that takes you to the back part of my apartment, and it works with fingerprint access. There wasn't time to still find my keys in my bag, but I didn't want the main gate I normally use to open wide enough for him to get in when I go in. He stops at my apartment, and as planned, I jump out, run into the cafe, run out the back, through the little gate, up to the second floor. My apartment was on the fourth floor, and I hammered on a neighbor's door. I went inside and told her and her husband everything that had happened, and asked if they would mind calling the cafe to explain why I ran through with no explanation and in such a state. I blocked Pete, and I haven't seen him since. I'm still not sure what his case was. From what I gathered, he was basically homeless, and I think he wanted to get into my apartment to maybe sleep over there for a while. I'm not sure if the girl that kept calling him was also a Tinder date that let him into her apartment and he just never left. All I know is that he scared the living daylights out of me, and I never ever want to fucking see him again. This all happened when I was 19. I'm not the best looking dude, so I've never had much luck with women, and I ended up on Tinder. I wasn't having much luck there either until like the third month of using it when a blonde woman named Katie messaged me. She was pretty enough that I just dismissed her as a bot. It wasn't until 3 days later that she messaged me again, which was odd because bots almost never message more than once. I clicked on her chat and replied, then looked at her profile. What I saw was pretty generic, but definitely wasn't a bot's profile. We had been talking for like a month when she proposed the idea that I come see her. I was pretty reluctant as she lived nearly 8 hours from me by car, but I had to admit I really did like her quite a bit, and I had been thinking about asking her if I could come see her for a while now. After a bit more badgering from her, I finally said that I would take the drive to see her. At this point, I had no reason to doubt, so she was who she said she was. We had video chatted every other week, and I called most days. I just assumed I got really lucky. Things did get a little weird on the way there, though. She kept messaging me, asking me where I was and making sure I was still coming. At some points, when I'd take more than 30 minutes to respond, she'd send me a slew of annoyed texts. Admittedly, I chalked it all up to her being nervous about me coming to see her. I was pretty nervous too, so I couldn't blame her. I had a hard time finding the house at first. The directions she gave me were pretty confusing, and it was all back through a series of gravel and dirt roads and a large thicket of trees. It was still about midway when I came onto an old-looking house. A window on the second floor was boarded up, but it didn't look abandoned. It just looked worn from the weather. Katie's red buggy that she liked to talk about was parked in front of the garage. I took out my phone and texted her that I was here. She only sent a smiley face in return. When I got out of my car to go knock on the door, I noticed that someone was looking at me from one of the second floor windows. I found it a little creepy, but I figured it was just her father or something. She had told me that he comes to stay with her every now and again, so I ignored it and knocked on her door. She answered with a smile and even gave me a kiss, which was a surprise, and I followed her inside. We sat down on her couch and started talking about our plans. When I asked her about her dad, "You didn't tell me that your dad was here," I said. "Was that going to be a surprise, or—" Katie looked confused and told me that her dad wasn't in here. I still thought she was keeping up the act, and I told her that she didn't have to keep pretending, and that I had seen him looking at me through the upstairs window. Katie went pale and said that we had to get out of there now. We ran out to our cars, and when I questioned Katie, she informed me that her dad wasn't there, and that she had been home alone until I showed up. I called the police, and while we was on the phone giving the address, Katie gasped and pointed at the window where I seen the guy last. He was looking at us from the window again. I got a better look of him, and he seemed older and frail, almost like he hadn't eaten anything in a while. He left the window after he saw that we saw him. The police took half an hour to show up, and the whole time Katie was crying and mumbling about how she was an idiot for not keeping her doors locked. When the police finally did show up, one started asking me and Katie questions, and the other two searched the house. They came back out a little later and told me and Katie that while they didn't find anyone, they did find that the back door was hanging open. Whoever it was had ran out into the woods, but the cops were sure the house was empty. After the cops left, Katie asked me to stay the night because she was too scared to be in the house alone right now. I gladly did, and we slept downstairs on the couch, as Katie's bed was the room next to the one the man was in. Katie had also brought out the shotgun that her father had given her, but she never used. I told her it was fine and that the man was gone, but she insisted, saying she'd feel safer if we had it out. I'm glad she did. Later that night, I was still wide awake watching TV. Katie had somehow managed to fall asleep. From the kitchen, I heard the sound of a doorknob being turned. At this point, I wasn't even scared. I was just pissed off. I flipped on the light in the kitchen and pointed the gun at the kitchen door, and there he was. The guy that had been in the house before was standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked, and I'm glad we had locked the door. The man unfroze and yet again ran into the woods. I woke up Katie and told her what had happened and called the police yet again. When they arrived, they did a sweep of the woods and found no one yet again. They told Katie and me that it'd probably be a good idea to stay somewhere else for the night. Me and Katie said our goodbyes. She was going to stay at a friend's house,
and I was going home. I left a little later, after Katie did. I was on the phone with my brother telling him about what had happened. My headlights were on. As I was talking, something caught my eye. That fucking man was standing at the corner of the house, just watching me. I gunned it out of there, and didn't even bother calling the police again. But I did text Katie, and she said she was going to call them again. I don't think Katie ever even went back to that house alone.